Big Bang that we've been told is the way it all started. Doesn't hold true anymore. So there are more things to learn and more places to look.
There is this greater force of good, I think, that has, like as you call God, that has enabled us to become almost actually untouchable.
We were rebels only because nobody else was doing that, because it became so politicised. There are still people who believe that the vaccines are good for you. There are still people who believe it. It's just ridiculous.
We have all these terrible systems in place, but it takes people to enable these systems to work.
It's easy to traumatise people. And when you're traumatised, you're easily led.
I'm delighted to have with me today the one and only legendary producer, singer. You didn't sing, did you?
I did, yeah.
Right. Singer, songwriter, and fantastic all-round musician, freedom-fighting, truth-telling, Mr. Mike Stock, who's also in the Guinness World of Records for the most #1 songs written, produced. Absolutely fantastic to meet you, and thank you for giving me this time.
It's a pleasure. I wonder what we're going to talk about, Ash.
Yes, shall we take it back to when you were a young person, a young child perhaps, growing up somewhere in Kent, I believe?
Well, I was born in Margate on the coast, but I grew up in Swanley, sort of near. I mean, really, we were 100 yards in Kent. Once you got over that border, you're in southeast London. But so I don't know really what to call myself. But I was born in Margate. That makes me either a man of Kent or a Kentish man. I forget which is which. But that's my earliest recollections really are from Swanley.
Right. And how did you get into the world of music? What made you become really interested in music? Because originally I think you wanted to be, or you were in a band to begin with, isn't it?
Well, I formed a band when I was very, very young, and I had lots of, my next door neighbour and I, he was a bit older than me, he had an electric guitar. We couldn't afford one, so I made one out of an old violin body and stuck an acoustic guitar fretboard on it. And so we jammed along. I mean, I learned all the Beatles songs, that kind of thing. My brother, who's a bit older than me, he ended up going to the Guildhall School of Music, and so music was, and he trained for that, and then he ended up playing in the German National Opera Orchestra for all of his working life, and so music was in our household from a very early time. He went to the grammar school and got music lessons, but I didn't go there and I didn't get the music lessons, but I picked up a guitar. My earliest recollections are the late 50s, early 60s, of actually wanting to know how to write a song like Rodgers and Hammerstein did, or Irving Berlin, the great American songbook, as well as, suddenly Lennon and McCartney are making, I think that's what I'd like to do. Yeah.
What was life like for you growing up in the 50s? Because we talked a little bit about this before we started this interview, and we talked actually about allergies and things like autism and not seeing anyone with, say, for example, peanut allergies.
Yeah.
What was life like growing up in the 50s? How different is it to what you see life like for young people now? You grew up in the 50s and a bit of 60s
well,
as well.
I think my experience will be like a lot of other people my age. Mother kicked us out of the house at the earliest possible moment. There were 5 of us, a budgie and a dog, in 3 bedrooms, so we spent a lot of time outside. And I seriously don't remember anybody, either at my school or that I played with as a kid, who had an allergy or attention deficit or some form of, other things that you hear about nowadays. I didn't know one person, but we had an outdoor life. So I think that's probably one of the main things that people don't do now. Mothers drive their children to school. I walked a round trip of a couple of miles to my school every day,
Take us then to your music career. Could you tell us how you then went and formed your own band and the inspirations for that, and then transition from that band into becoming a songwriter with, of course, the most famous of all, Stock Aitken Waterman, and then the Hit Factory, of course.
Well, I was in a band. I formed a band at a very young age, but it was the songwriting that really interested me. But as I grew up, I went to university, and I did a theology course. I didn't last the course. I left after a couple of years because I was just itching to get going in some other, in the music business somehow. And I started out by I had an acoustic guitar, an electric piano, and a drum machine. And I went out in 1976, roughly, and sang for my supper, really. Went into pubs and clubs. And they used to pay me £15 to do it. So, I mean, that was good enough. I did 7 gigs a week, and suddenly I'm earning some money. I was in a pub in Greenwich, and a guy came up to me and said, "Can I play along with you?" And he had a guitar. Suddenly, I wasn't earning £15, I was earning £7. Now, this isn't a good idea. But eventually, it all coalesced, and I had a full band behind me, and I did hotels in London and got picked up by an agent who loved what we were doing, and we did the Dorchester, the Hilton and all. So that was a step up. But finally, in New Year's Eve 1983, I said to the rest of the band, "Look, I can keep doing this till I'm 70 or 80, There was a band like Joe Loss, he was in his 70s, Ray McVeigh, a big band in all the pubs, in the big hotels. I thought, we've got to stop doing it because I want to go into music production. And basically the girl singer said, "Oh, I'll make my own way," and the drummer said, "I'm leaving," and the guitarist this, that and the other. But Matt Aitken said, who was in my band at the time as a guitarist, said, "I'll come with you." And I had a studio under my house, and we just went down there. We gave up gigs at the Royal Lancaster Hotel, New Year's Eve 83. January the 1st, it's 84, and on the 15th of January, I took this track of a song idea to Pete Waterman, and by February the 14th, we're in the Marquee Studios in Wardour Street recording it. So that's how that formed and how it began, and from then it took off very quickly. I think there was a lot of pent-up ambition and invention in both me and Matt, and we just needed a proper studio and a proper reason to go forward. And so the first record we did was a minor hit, the second was a top 20, the third was a top 5, and about the fourth was a number 1, so, in that year. So
Is that Dead or Alive?
Dead or Alive,
was the
yeah.
first number 1?
Well, we recorded it in September of 84. We didn't get released to the January, but it was the first number 1 we had, yeah.
You were writing songs.
Yeah.
How did you find the artists, or where did you search
Well,
for
that
them?
was
How did you go about?
Pete Waterman. His role was not as a musician or a strictly hands-on producer as Matt and I were. Pete was more the business end of it. He knew the contacts and had the relationships with various artist managers. So he would suggest we work with this, that and the other. But once we had the hit, for example, we had a hit with Hazel Dean in 1984, a song we'd written, and Pete Burns of Dead or Alive heard that coming out of the radio and said, "Well, who produced that? I want to go and work with them." So eventually people came to us. They all want a hit. So, yeah.
How different is the music industry now to what it was when you were starting out in those years, 1984?
Yeah, it's massively different. I mean, back then there were probably hundreds of record labels, and if you didn't get on with one record label or one A&R, and you could move on to someone else, But slowly over the 80s and through the 90s, they coalesced, and they're just about 3 big majors now, where all the labels have been sort of eaten up. So now, if you don't get on with Universal, the word goes around to BMG, and they don't want to touch you either. So, I've been. We were independent back then, and I've retained that as a mentality as much as anything else. I'll work with anybody, but you can't tell me what to do. That's the way I think, anyway.
Yes. And leading up to where we are, the last 3 years, so COVID pandemic is declared, and you saw it for what it was from the very beginning. And do you think some of that came from your experiences perhaps dealing with the music industry? Because you would have had to have dealt with them, and in a way they were quite tyrannical, I think.
Yeah.
Could you make that comparison?
I
can.
Is that
right?
I mean, probably it wasn't so much of an awareness that I was doing it for that reason, but when I look at it now, I realise, of course, and I did realise then, because Stock Aitken Waterman were in a pitched battle against the majors, who were doing everything they could to stop us.
Right. From the very beginning.
Right from the beginning.
With Hazel Dean.
And So we went on a tiny little label called Proto, run by a man called Barry Evangelos, who was a Greek Cypriot, and he was just doing sideline, if you like, to the side of the mainstream. And we went with him because he had a passion, and we weren't going to have to fight the majors, but we couldn't get arrested by the majors. They were effectively trying to block us. So we would do records like Roadblock and do it under an assumed... Oh, actually, we didn't let anybody know it was us. And that broke through in the mainstream, which surprised them. But I suppose I took that lesson into the COVID scam, realising that the charts were largely fictitious, things that we used to take for granted, realising what they control and how they controlled it. I realised really nothing was to be taken for granted, nothing on the surface anyway. You've got to look into it and see what's going on. But as soon as the pandemic kind of was announced, why I was really suspicious? Because the very first case of COVID that they announced, they'd threatened it was coming because it was in China and people were falling over, and all that. And there was this Italy holiday place where the very first confirmed case in the UK was just down the road here at Hazelmere. Hazelmere is 15 minutes from where I live, and Hazelmere is stockbroker belt, is Middle England to the nth degree, and that's why they chose it as the place, because that will frighten the life out of everybody, won't it? If it's happening here, it's going to happen in the cities, it's going to happen in the crowded areas, in the nice leafy suburbs. That's where it's happening. That's what I say. Yeah, this is a scam. This is traumatising. This is making you frightened. So I then looked at the Office of National Statistics, and I could see there was no increase in mortality. And then I thought, this is damaging, because my brother died. My brother died in March, end of March, beginning of April in 2020, and they banned all flights out of the country. We couldn't go to the funeral. He was working in Germany, where he had all his life. We couldn't get to the funeral. Then I saw that this was more than just a scam for whatever reason. This is damaging people's life, it's traumatising. And we got worse and worse and worse, as we all know. And when I did the research, the mortality in the UK, the 20-year average, didn't increase in 2020, the year of the virus, but it did start to increase in 2021. And that was the year of the vaccine. So that's how I connected that up. And that's inarguable, that is there, black and white. And there are people fighting that point, but I still see adverts for get your kids vaccinated or get the next booster. I myself get a text from my local GP, for COVID boosters, flu jabs, shingles, anything to sell you a jab. So this is wrong on every level for me. So I've spoken up as far as I can, but somebody will say to me, "Are you a doctor, Michael? Do you know what you're talking about? Have you got any experience?" So, but there are plenty of doctors who know what's going on.
So when you did speak out and raise your concerns, what has been the response from friends, family, associates? Because you know so many people, I'm sure, through the industry, and obviously your family as well. How did people generally
from my family point of view, it's not been very good, because close family members have been vaccinated and boosted, and I've had the conversation. I tried to persuade them not to in the first place, but they all, not all my close family, my sons, my daughter, my wife and grandchildren, we've not been vaccinated for COVID and won't be. But my other relatives on a wider scale have, and we don't talk anymore, really. There was big arguments. They all thought I was a tinfoil hat wearer, and you get the general insults. And I was mostly disappointed by colleagues, as you might call them, in the music industry, big-name star artists who promoted the vaccine. Kaiser Chiefs, for example, who now we call Pfizer Chiefs. You're at their concert and it's put your hands up if you've had the AstraZeneca, put your hands up if you've had the, They were paid to do it, and I'm appalled, and I won't let them forget.
It's interesting as well, because people always looked up to groups like the Rolling Stones as the real rebels, and here they were completely being very...
Pillars of the establishment, they were.
And I've heard this talked about before, about the groups like the Beatles and the Stones that maybe they were sort of created in a way as an act, really, to make us believe that they were these amazing rebels, but perhaps they were actually created.
Yeah.
I've heard of this organisation called the Tavistock that might have been involved in their creation, and we know a lot about the Tavistock in terms of what they've done with their children and sort of drugs and
the medical
medication
interventions at children, this body dysmorphia, and also the idea that a child can be born in the wrong body. They take that on. But I see Tavistock Institute, who founded somewhere in the 1920s, as a social engineering establishment. That's what they do. And the Beatles, as far as I can see, and there is evidence to back this up, but without going too deeply into it, they were a manufactured, created. I mean, to believe that they were suddenly these four lads with this amount of global appeal. This is how it works. They have the control of the media, so Tavistock can, if you make your mind up, you're going to establish an act in the way that they did. And the Stones, similarly, were introduced as a sort of a counterbalance to the Beatles. So it's all very engineered. That is something. And everywhere I see the Tavistock involvement, it's all very shadowy. That's what I would say.
So if we could go back a little bit to your experiences in the music industry. So you said that the charts pretty much are rigged, but I guess when you were releasing all the music, you were challenging and countering that rigging, and perhaps your tracks were genuinely selling, of course, or was there rigging even then? There must have been a bit of rigging, I suppose, with their own acts and their preferred acts and stuff. And is that where perhaps your groups and your songwriting interfered with that rigging? Perhaps broke that mould, or
we did.
Was it not so bad at the time? I
mean, there are genuine records which you couldn't stop selling, and that would be true. But one of the songs that I did after my relationship with Matt and Pete was called the Fast Food Song, which we were steaming up the charts. I mean, it's a silly little ditty of a number, but I knew it would upset the rock and roll brigade, who thought it's beneath their dignity to like that. But we were steaming up the charts, and they had a main act on Sony that needed to be number one, and so we were prevented from that. We weren't allowed to go on Top of the Pops and promote it. You see, we're number two, but you don't get Top of the Pops. So they controlled all of that. But back when we were working at Stock Aitken Waterman, they had you had your Michael Jackson, you had your big Madonna, your big acts, and you couldn't put your record out in the same week as them because you would be blocked. And many of our records stalled at number 41. And we always used to laugh when it happened, because just outside the top 40 means you're invisible, radio won't pick you up, But some of the songs, I suppose, just took on a life of their own, and people genuinely went for them. Things like Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Astley, or I Should Be So Lucky, Kylie Minogue, for example, you couldn't have stopped those. They had their own wind in the sails that the industry couldn't really blow you off course,
I grew up in the 80s, so as a child, and it really, looking back now, it's so nostalgic, and it was such a liberating time, and obviously your songs were really, with the artists that sang them, they really were defined. They defined the times, and they're very freeing and very happy songs. And I think it reminds me of when you talked about Irving Berlin and Rodgers and Hammerstein. And maybe these things, maybe your music is much more the true rebellion, because perhaps when you start to go political, like let's say Jimi Hendrix and then you had Marvin Gaye later on, and obviously the Stones and a bit of the Beatles in their later years, they were all sort of became very political, and it sort of sounded like perhaps they were agenda driven. And whereas the truth of freedom and liberation is more the happiness, the joy. There's nothing more positive in terms of the vibrations and the frequencies that they produce.
Absolutely, I think you're absolutely right. I didn't realise necessarily at the time, but looking back, I realised that Rodgers and Hammerstein, Irving Berlin, they're lovely songs that make you happy, make you smile. They give it to you. It's a gift to you.
Yes.
I didn't like the political gesturing in music because for me that's a misuse of it. So, and we were rebels only because nobody else was doing that, because it became so politicised. So in that, and I'd still stick with that. But I think the truth of whether your song is any good or not is if it lasts for a few years. And I'm not trying to be too self-promoting here, it's too immodest of me, but in a way we're doing a musical now, you see, which features all of our songs from 30 and 40 years ago. People still love it and people still want it, and we are still making getting the clicks on YouTube. Rick Astley's got 1.4 billion now, and etc., etc. And I don't see as many artists or songs from the 80s that have stood this test. So you can almost count, you say that record was number one, wasn't it, in April, such as that, but I don't hear it anymore because it wasn't really number one, you know, it was pushed there.
Yes.
The real hits stay forever, really. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I couldn't say my son actually loves Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, and he's only 13, and
right.
it's still very popular.
Yeah,
he
it
knows
is.
it very well, so
Yeah.
it has stood the test
Yeah.
of time. Yeah.
Well, I think it's got some joy about it, you see, and that will supersede the generations, I hope. Yeah. We shouldn't all be too depressed about everything. I mean, music is supposed to lift you, really. You know, plenty of things will depress you.
Yes, absolutely. And we were talking a bit earlier about you've done a bit of experimentation of your own, where you've used your speakers and put some, you said, sand and salt on top. And you've could you talk a little bit about that, because you're quite certain that perhaps different frequencies and vibrations can really help for our health, isn't it? If you've got the right frequency. Yeah,
it's an hypothesis at the moment, but I have seen experiments on it. But just to come at this way, when I play piano and guitar, but when you play an acoustic piano particularly, I do so every day, and not just because I want to write a song, because the feeling I get when I'm touching the keys and the piano itself is vibrating, the whole thing, it's a wooden instrument, it's got all those strings vibrate, and you go through all the frequencies on a piano from low to high. I get a feeling of well-being as it's going through my arms and into my body. So it got me thinking anyway, because when you put a speaker and a metal plate together and you run a tone generator running from very low tones right up to the higher tones, and you sprinkle onto the metal plate sand, dry sand, for example, it's just an incoherent mess. But as you raise the tone generator up through the notes, you reach certain frequencies, suddenly they're coherent. They form patterns, beautiful geometric patterns, like you'd see in a kaleidoscope. And then you go past that goes incoherent, you go up to another frequency and a new pattern appears. I want to know why. The patterns are different and they only work at certain frequencies. Is it the room that's making a difference? So if I took that same machine in a different room, would the coherence occur at a different frequency? So these are things I'm looking into. I've seen certain doctors who are suggesting that you can destroy tumours by vibrations. You could just rattle them to pieces in a way, and then the body distributes them out through the your lymph system, and you get rid of them. So that's what I'm looking into. I think it's an area that would sound a bit mad to most people, but I'm telling you there is something in it.
Yes, no, I remember, because we looked at this in science as well, where you can use ultrasound to break kidney stones. That's from the vibration.
Yes,
clearly.
Indeed, yeah.
And yes, for many other purposes, isn't it?
Yeah, I can see dentists use it to break up the calcium. Some say they have a vibrational sort of probe they've got. Yes. So yeah, there's something in this, but it doesn't surprise me that the medical profession doesn't want to look into it too much, because it's very cheap to organise. You just need a speaker and a tone generator.
Yeah, not good for big pharma.
No, God. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's one of the things that I'd say was the eye-opener. In the same way as I say the music industry and what it did and what it does, same as big pharma and doctors, what they've done, you know. I mean, I've truly decided, to look underneath the surface of those you thought you could trust, the things you thought you could believe in. Yeah. Everyone needs to readjust, I think.
Yes. It's interesting, because it really sounds like your real ethos was independence.
Yeah.
I think that's fundamental, and I think that's stood you very, very well and helped in your success. What would you say to if you were now a young person and you had the same sort of mentality that you had when you were young? How would you cope in this environment? What advice might you give to a young person, let's say a future songwriter or a music producer, musician? How should they go about approaching their careers or starting out their careers?
I don't know really, because it's all different now. I think the thing, God, they're going to hate me for saying it, but I wouldn't go to a music college. They just turn out one thing after another. It's more or less the same thing. I would retain. What is it you want to achieve? I'd ask yourself, what is it you actually want to achieve? Do you just want to sell records to earn money? Is that what you want to do? Do you want to please people, or do you want to educate people? What do you actually want to do? Identify what you want to do. And if you can go into a pub or a club and they pay you for it, and then you start doing the wrong music, they'll stop paying you. You know, you've got to learn what people want, because that's your business. Most people don't look at it that way. They look at it, I'm going to go out there and give them what I want. I learned a big lesson for that. I have said this to people before. When I was asked at the Grove, at the Dorchester, I was doing, it was a 12-year-old, it was an Arab party, 12-year-old boy, that he becomes an adult, and they were throwing a party for him. So it was a fairly well-to-do family, and had my band, and we were playing some sort of adult music, if you like. And the mother came up to us and said, "Mike, can you play the Birdie song for the kids?" You know, and that was beneath the dig. I looked at the drum and said, "I'm not doing the Birdie song." We didn't want it, so I said, "Sorry, we don't know the Birdie song." And she came up again and said, "Mike, please, for the kids, so they can do the silly dance." You know, and I said, "Look, sorry, we don't know it." And a few minutes later, she came up and she put £50 at my foot, at the foot of the girls' singing, at the foot of the drum. She walked up and put money down. I'm so embarrassed. I picked the money up and gave it. I said, "Sorry, I don't want your money. We will do the Birdie song." And we did the Birdie song, but I learned then I'm not there for me. I'm not there because they're paying me to do this. I'm not there to show off. I'm there to provide them entertainment, the thing that they want. So that was a massive lesson for me. I'll never make that mistake again.
What's also amazing about yourself is you have this very big, strong mentality. You feel to me like someone who's very ambitious. So you're not sort of feeling like, I want to be little me. You know, I want to reach out to a largest audience as possible. Could you tell us what sort of mentality is required to have these big visions that you do, or you have had all throughout your career?
Yeah, I've not really thought about it a great deal. I do know that one of the things my mother said before she died, well, as we were growing up, was that the greatest gift any parent can give their child is their own independence. So you should never be independent on your parents to the extent that when they're gone, you're lost, and they will be gone. So my mother said, you know, develop your own independence. And I would say that is true of the state that wants to nanny you. The most independent you can gain away from those who would govern you is the best way to be. No one's going to go around and become a mass murderer just because they want to be independent of the government. And I don't like the way they want to control every aspect of my life, and I think that's partly because of what my mother said. I realise they're just like a great big parent trying to control you. And I want my kids to grow up, I'm going to die, and I want them to grow up and or feel the loss, but not be lost without you. And so that's where that started with me, I think. But also, I've realised in the music, if I have a gift, if God gave me anything at all, I suppose it was to do with songwriting, and I always wanted to do it. So that there's a duty to go out and do it, really, to follow your whatever you have, whatever talents you've got. And I noticed there were two kinds of artists, really, in the world. There were those that were inward, and you had to go into their world to enjoy them. So lots of bands with an attitude, you know, you either liked Oasis or you liked Morrissey. I'm just trying to rattle some names off. And there are other artists that would just stand on stage in a sequined outfit and give, you know, and so they went out to your world. But so I always was of the latter thinking, that I want to give whatever happiness and joy. And writing a song and making a record for me and Matt in the studio was all about how can we lift this, make sure the verse starts off here, make sure the bridge takes you up, make sure the chorus takes you even higher, make sure that it's got some joy and some sound and a tune that everyone can latch onto. That was all I ever aimed to do. I mean, because you can go down a route where you just play, E, A and B on the guitar and do some rock and roll riffs and just sing the same old tune. That wasn't me at all. So.
Yeah, very versatile as well. You worked with a range of artists and
Yeah.
you could produce a range of different styles of music, but it
Yeah.
still had that sort of unique trademark signature sound.
Yeah,
that
which
we all
upset a
wanted.
few of the bands because we worked with Judas Priest once and we made some very nice sounding records with them, but they couldn't live with it. I think,
Can't please everyone, although you try.
No.
Fantastic. And also, it sounds to me that you're a very giving type of artist entertainer as well. You really want to give to your
Yeah,
audience
that
and
would
give
be
to
the
the
aim,
people,
yeah.
which is very, very powerful, I think. And you don't always hear that from a lot of the music
No, it's either
artists.
like me, and I'm saying, no, like this.
Yes. And you said something about the college. You said it's not maybe the place to go. Don't go to the music college. And I've heard you talk about places like the Brit School as
Yeah.
well, and other schools of sort of dance and music and entertainment. What is it? Why would you suggest that, in your own words, for the youngsters coming up now? First of all, obviously, there's a worry of going into debt.
Well, there is
and,
that.
and the interest that they have to pay
Yeah.
to the banks after being robbed.
Yeah, of course, but I'm yeah, I know. Look, the thing is, there's lots of colleges now. They're everywhere, and I feel sorry for, coming out of school and somebody saying, "Do you want to go and learn how to do some carpentry? Do you want to go and do a plasterer? Do you want to go and do plumbing? Do you want to go, or do you want to go to a college where you can stand on stage and play a guitar?" It's a difficult choice, and the ones I've been round to have a look at, and they are candy shop really for young people. Got everything there, all the drums, all the guitars, all the recording equipment. It must be very tempting, but at the end of every year they're chucking out graduates who've got nowhere to go really, because music and talent you get paid for the rarity of your talent. These days it's very rare to find a plumber. So I would just say, if you just want to do it to satisfy yourself, just be an amateur musician, do it in your spare time. But I mean, there are people who are born to it. There must be people who are born to it, but they're few and far between.
So we do notice that there is a clear kind of, sadly, a split in the world. There's the people who are conforming and following and going down the routes that the nanny state is instructing them to do so.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who are trying to move and find alternative paths. And so where's the university or the colleges, where are they going wrong? Because they're clearly part of the nanny state in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And perhaps part of the deep state in some way,
Yeah.
indoctrinating our youngsters.
Yeah.
So where are they going wrong, and what could we provide them? What should they be doing, the youngsters, instead, if they're not going to go to those colleges? I think you have touched on that quite a bit.
Well, it's so difficult. You've just finished your schooling. You've got some A-levels maybe or whatever, and I mean, people don't want their student life to end, do they? I mean, I know people who've been students all their life. There is a student mentality. I mean, a relative of mine was in. You went to university, then became a lecturer at the university, then became chair of the university. At the end of it all, you've been in education all your life. Education is no good for its own sake. Education must be leading you somewhere. It has got an end result. I mean, it's like a politician who wants to get elected and then only just spends the next 3 years trying to get re-elected. What's the point of that? You got to college to learn something, to then use that, to add some dimension in the world that's missing, or to just, pursue your dream. Too many people just want to be educated. I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I left university after 2 years, so I didn't take a degree, because I knew I wanted to do something more different. I mean,
and almost educate yourself in a way, isn't it? By discovering the world for yourself in your own experiences.
Yeah, and they're the best. That's the best form, isn't it, of education? Though I don't really know what to say, but in terms of the artists in the colleges, for example, most of them now, they've got no choice. They form wedding bands, function bands. And there's loads of them now because both my sons got married recently and both had a band, and there were hundreds to choose from. I mean, they've got to earn a living somehow. But we don't need more of them, is what I would say.
More plumbers and
we do,
very good ones as well.
Yeah.
They're not the cowboys, as they call them. Yeah. I'd like to go a little bit into the music industry because that's a world that you know. And I'm sure I listened to you talk about the British Phonographic Institute, which
BPI.
I think they gave you some. They literally came to you, isn't it, and said that we don't want you to do this anymore. Can you describe what happened there with those sort of meetings?
We're talking about the mid-90s, really. There was a ground shift then. The digital world was taking over. So they took over the charts where data could be analysed and regurgitated in a form they liked. So the charts weren't necessarily now based on pure sales, with retail outlets like Woolworths making reports. Woolworths was slowly going downhill. Woolworths relied entirely on record sales from the music industry, because you walk into Woolworths, they'd have the top 20 there and the albums and everything. And the industry bought the shelf space. Hundreds of millions per year were spent buying shelf space at Woolworths and Our Price, all those shops that have gone. And the industry was slowly moving over to the digital format. You didn't buy a physical CD now, you buy a download or something. But they didn't like the fact that we, as an independent label, I left, saw Stock Aitken Waterman broke up in '93, but Matt came back to work with me, and I formed a new studio and a new record label. And the first thing we put out, we had a top 5 hit in the UK, and the second thing we put out was a number 1. And we were number 2 in America at the same time. And suddenly the follow-up to that was hauled out of the charts, and they said we cheated.
Wow.
And then, it was reduced its position from where it was going in the top 10. It went down. They put it down to 41, which is the graveyard. And the next record we put out, they removed from the charts altogether. And I sued them. I sued the BPI. They claimed that somebody had gone into a shop and ordered 27. And when the shopkeeper said, "Why do you want 27?" he apparently said, "Well, because I'm hyping the record." So he's the worst hyper you've ever met. And so I didn't believe that. So I offered a reward for the identity of this person. £10,000 reward I offered, and put it on the front of the Music Week journal that came out every week. There were no takers. I sued the BPI. I got a barrister on the case. I sued them under the European unfair trade laws, which that was an abuse of their dominant position. And in the end, they got me round a table and said, "Mike, we don't want to go to war with you. We'll withdraw our claim. We'll give you your records, whatever." And exactly as that was happening, the London Underground were tunnelling underneath my studio. And I collapsed my studio on one side. I was just about to do a joint venture with BMG to produce Westlife, but I couldn't do it. I asked Simon Cowell and John Preston if they could hang on for a few weeks while I got my studio sorted out, and 6 weeks turned into 6 months, and they moved on, and we still haven't resolved it. They paid me a compensation, this is London Transport, for the damage they'd done to my building, the actual physical damage, but not for the consequential loss of my studio and the work that I was doing. So I went out of business virtually.
Oh, God.
I did a couple of bands until around 2000. I sold the building. I had no other choice, and developers moved in, and then I made a few records on my own, and then I built another studio, and you're in about the 5th studio I've ever built.
Lovely, yeah.
But because I just rely on my own metal, I try, and any money I earn in the music industry I put back into it, really, one way or another. So.
Also about the music industry, I mean, we hear so much, and now we learn so much about all the sort of dark things and going on in the industry with the over-sexualisation of young women particularly, and even sort of emasculation of the male as well, and also even the satanic sort of ritualistic type of things. And I'm sure you've mentioned this, that this really does go on, and it's not just a rumour or
Well,
just
no,
a one-off?
on the over-sexualisation, I spoke up about it, and the Daily Mail featured a front page thing, and I got a lot of flack for that. People thinking the normal answer was, "What about Elvis Presley? He was sexy, wasn't he?" But this was a different thing entirely. And to some degree, they backed off that position. The industry, they moved away from it. I'm talking about in 2010, around that, when all of these artists, particularly American girls, were too overt about it, But there is a ritualistic aspect to this, which I only know that I was invited to on one occasion and declined.
Did they tell you what that would be about? Or what that
No,
would involve?
well, there was a particular occasion when I was invited to go to a hotel somewhere. Well, to put it bluntly, where there would be anything you want. If you like girls, there'll be some girls there. If you want boys, if you want drugs, there'll be drugs. I said to the guy, "It sounds very dodgy to me," and he said, "Well, don't worry about it. The chief constable of the police would be present, and they're aware of it going." And basically, what he was telling me. But I said, "There's no way I'm doing that," because my lesson in life was years and years ago. I had a car. I'm sure I've said this before, that a battered old car was forever letting my wife and I down whenever we needed it. And some friend said, "Don't worry, mate, here's what we do. You leave it unlocked. We'll go in, we'll steal it, and we'll bury it somewhere in the river, in the London Dockyard river, and you just claim the insurance." And we both probably like, "Well, that'll get us out of a bit of a hole. Probably get £5,000 for it on the insurance." And I said, "Wait a minute, no, wait. If we do that, that person, those people will know we did that for the rest of our lives. And I'm trying to make it in the music industry here. If I ever become famous, they'll be knocking on the door." I said, "We're not doing it." So that was a big lesson in me. And I realised that what I was being offered in this particular occasion, going to a hotel somewhere, where a lot of music business people were going to be, artists, and they were telling me it was like a party atmosphere and all that. But you'd witness something, or you'd take part in something, and forever you would be theirs whenever they knocked on the door to do anything. So I've retained my absolute independence from all of that. So nobody can blackmail me, bribe me, or coerce me. And that was because I didn't go along with them.
But it seems like for a lot of artists, and a lot of them starting out, they're very young and they're very hungry for success.
Yeah.
It seems to me that you always hear that they have to sort of sign their soul over to the devil, literally, and they have to go through some things. Did you were any artists that you were involved? Because this was a long time ago when you had all this Hit Factory. Yeah. Were things like that going on at the time as well?
I knew of one artist that went to some kind of ritualistic thing he told me about. And that's only because he volunteered it. In the main, artists that I knew had managers. I dealt with them in the studio, and that was the relationship. So I had no other relationship with them. So they had a manager who might have organised or been involved in stuff that I wouldn't have known, and I kept away if there were. But this one particular guy, he had a massive stairway to the stars afterwards. Achieved enormous success without the talent, but he told me about his encounter in a hotel room in London, which sounded quite frightening. I didn't know whether to believe him at the time. In fact, I didn't really believe him. But suddenly, after we'd stopped working together, he reached a sort of iconic status somehow. And because the heavy doors are opened for you, but we had to do all our own lifting in that regard. So I knew of stuff, but not enough detail to, and I wouldn't name names anyway. But
and in terms of all the artists you work with, which one's your favourite? Are you able to say that?
Yeah.
And why? What is it about those artists, or the particular one that you thought, wow, was it about their professionality, their talent?
Yeah.
Or what was it?
There was a number. There were a number of for absolute immediate artistic brilliance. It was Donna Summer, Paul McCartney, and Cliff Richard, to be honest, because they got behind the mic and just delivered whatever you wanted. They just delivered it. They could turn it on, switch it on. In fact, Paul McCartney, I was doing the Hillsborough charity record for the disaster at the football ground. And he stood behind the mic and said, "Right, Mike, how do you want me to sing this?" This is Paul McCartney. Well, just sound like Paul McCartney if you can. And I gave him sort of a bit of a direction, and he did it immediately. Donna Summer was like an actress behind the microphone. And Cliff, you know, he just got his voice. I sang in the tune, and he went bump, there it was. You know, one take and done. A lot of the other artists, it was not as easy from that. Kylie was great because she had a brilliant ear, but a lot of the other acts you needed to work on quite a lot. And some back in the day, I ended up not deciding I shouldn't do this anymore, but I would have so much frustrating arguments with them. Concentrate, not that, like that. Oh, I'd shout at them, and they'd be in tears. And in the end, I realised that's not the right way to do it. So I don't do that anymore with my artism. It's all very level, and it is what it is.
And your personal favourite song that you wrote, what would that be, or maybe a selection?
Yeah, you know, people ask me that, and at times I answer in I suppose it sounds trite now, but the one that sold the most, because it was the one that people liked the most, and that's all I was trying to do. There are some songs that weren't particularly hits, which might have been album tracks or B-sides or something to singles, which I quite like, because at that time I wasn't trying to be anything in particular. I just went wherever my muse was taking me. I like the Donna Summer stuff that she did because of her delivery. But there's some great Kylie records I did as well. And I obviously like Never Gonna Give You Up, the Rick Astley one, because, you know, blimey, no, you can't turn your back on that. It's still doing the business wherever it goes, you know.
Where did you draw your inspiration to write these lovely lyrics? Yeah, so many as well, and so prolific too, you know. Because we always hear about writer's block. In film, you'd certainly hear about writer's block.
Yeah.
But you were so prolific. Where do you draw your inspiration from? Obviously your life experiences?
Well, no, I couldn't have lived all the things I wrote about. I'd have been a right mess. Seriously, no, it's imagination. I mean, I a lot of the time with the artist's first records, I almost did an autobiography in my mind. They'd tell me about themselves, and I would learn a bit about them, and that would trigger off an idea. I mean, I thought Kylie was, in her world, was very... Why did she want to be a singer? She was an actress, and in her soap in Australia, she'd won awards out there. She was a great-looking girl and a dancer and a singer. I thought, well, you know, you've got everything, haven't you? Maybe you haven't got love, is what I thought. So I should be so lucky in love is the idea. It's not it's kind of regretful song. It's not. It's got a happy tone, but it's about I've got everything, but it's all in my imagination. What I really want, you know, and you know, so I kind of thought that about her at the time. Rick had told me, for example, Rick Astley, that he was still boy and girlfriend with a girl he'd known from a 5-year-old. I thought, well, that's fidelity, and Never Gonna Give You Up sort of idea came to mind. So, yeah.
Really quick, and you seem to not take too long to write.
I think the ones that they come in two forms for me. They either come like in a stream of consciousness. I get it. I'm getting it. I'm moving it. It's all done in my head. And there's the others where you kind of have to dig them out and, you know, fight for them. But
so clearly all these industries, whether it's the pharmaceutical or the education system or the music industry, film, there's clearly you got these people at the sort of human form, people at the top, but then there's this sort of hidden group of people, entities, difficult to say. I mean, have you met any people? Because you're clearly... Whereabouts would you be in the music industry at your peak? And did you get to meet the people at the top? And do you think there's this hidden entity above that? Is it human? Is it non-human? Can we go down that route?
I don't mind saying a bit about that. I do think. I mean, I met the chairman of all the major record labels from time to time, but they were definitely human. But there was definitely a layer above that, which was probably controlling everything. And in media, you hear it now. You know, they're all coming from the same cue sheet. Somebody's writing the auto cue somewhere, and they're all saying the same words. So somebody's orchestrating. I do get the feeling that it doesn't have to be a entirely human entity that's at the top of it. I do get the feeling that when you have corporations, big tech, giant globalist companies who issue commands to their operatives who are at the human level, who act in such a psychopathic way to their fellow humans, who wouldn't normally act that way on a one-to-one, like the way bankers can treat individuals and bankrupt them or destroy them. As a one-to-one, you're just a bloke doing this to another bloke. But I'm just obeying orders, or that's our company policy. So the companies are psychopathic, as an entity. So and where does that come from? That comes from somewhere that's not a human place. You destroy humans this way, so that doesn't seem right to me. So I can see how human development, human even evolution, how that has been somehow intervened at some level. I can see that. I think because Darwin doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for most people now. Yes. And, the James Webb Telescope, the new massively going back into the past where it can see the Big Bang that we've been told is the way it all started, doesn't hold true anymore. So there are more things to learn and more places to look. But I think the thing that strikes me most of all is that the universe is intelligible. So there's intelligence behind it all. So whilst there may be sub-entities who can be destructive of human beings, there's at the back of it all, for want of a better word, God.
Yes. And I think we've had a really difficult time. I mean, you've lived through many decades, and so you have a lot of experience of what the life was like in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. All before what we've experienced the last 3 years. I've never experienced anything quite like the last 3 years, and I really feel for the young people, the children in particular, obviously the elderly as well, the way they've been treated. We're very fortunate because I think you're quite right that there is this greater force of good, I think, that has, like as you call God, that has enabled us to become almost actually untouchable by this. I mean, when you really raise your vibrations and you feel positive and you feel empowered, it really feels like you can get through all of this unscathed. But sadly, our fellow humans have been really deeply programmed, a vast majority of them. And that's very worrying. But we've, particularly I say for yourself, you've been, even in the 80s and the 90s, you were so successful. Even when you had this, perhaps the dark force was still there in the music industry, trying to, move you aside, so to speak. But you overcame all of that and still are in the Guinness World of Records. So they're successful, despite their best efforts to sort of...
I am positive about everything. I still am positive. I've seen what's happened to fellow friends and relatives, and, if there's any message, it's easy to traumatise people. And when you're traumatised, you're easily led. You can be driven like cattle. I think that, for goodness sake, they call a storm by a name now. They give it a name. So everyone can get frightened about Storm Deirdre that's coming in. Oh, my God, Storm Deirdre. When you give a name like, there's this new disease called COVID, you up the level of people's fear. And that was clearly what was going on. I just want everybody to be like me, see through that. See through the scams, the panics, the traumas, the fear-mongering. Come out the other end of it. Don't trust anybody. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Be independent of all of that as far as you can be. That's the only thing I would say. And it's good. It's good to be free of them.
This is really great words, really, to end and to give us all optimism. Because I think one of the things, I was just discussing this earlier today, is that we have all these terrible systems in place, but it takes people to enable these systems to work. If the people just stop cooperating, then it'd be great. But we don't seem to learn, and yet we're taught about Nazi history and how people cooperated with it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. But we don't seem to have learned from it, and that's quite disturbing.
It is, really. Well, the new Nazism, it's here now in front of us. But don't comply is what I would say.
Yes. So, Mike, where do you see the future of humanity? Are you optimistic overall in the short term and the long term?
Look, I am optimistic overall, without a doubt. We have all got to stand together, but more of us have to awaken to see what is being done in the first place. So I hope we are getting there a little bit. I'm seeing the signs. So that's a positive thing. I just want that it's a beautiful life if we've all got allowed to live it, you know. That we should not be... You've got to check all of the information you're getting and really look at... There are still people who believe that the vaccines are good for you. There are still people who believe it. It's just ridiculous. Open your eyes. I mean, I can't really say any much more, you know, because I believe it's in you. It's just in you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can feel it here in this room. Yes.
We've got to fight. We've got to fight for yourself, for your brothers, your sisters, your mother, your father, everybody. Fight for them and don't listen to what they're telling you. Because I mean, the only thing I'm saying that's a bit depressing is I'm sure they've got something else lined up. But look at it when it comes up. If it's another pandemic or something else going on, like there's a war over here, now there's a war over there. You know what's going on. We know what's going on.
Yes, perhaps we should focus more within and keep our focus on our family, friends, loved ones.
Whoever they're telling you is the enemy, have a little think about that before you go along with it.
Yeah, and shut that TV off. And
don't.
A bit more social media too.
Shut the BBC. I do. But anyway.
It's been a real honour and pleasure talking to you, and you know, having followed you on Twitter for quite some time, you're really inspirational to me and a lot of other people, and you give us great belief as well. But where does all this courage come from, and this belief? Because it does take courage to stand up when most people are walking that direction off the cliff, so to speak, and you're turning the other way.
Well, and of course, because lots of people I get ridiculed. I got told I was all sorts of things, you know, by saying anything that didn't go along with the mainstream, and that stopped now. Weirdly, I used to get people jump on me on Twitter. You know, you'd say this, they didn't like it, and you get thousands of people coming. Hey, they seem to have stopped now. I think I've won that argument over that particular forum. If I have any courage, it's only because because things feed off each other. If you have an independent mindset, then because most people are worried that if they go against the mainstream, they lose their job, they lose standing with friends, they lose whatever. I'm not in it as a popularity contest. I never really cared whether people liked me or not. I still don't, and I'm not dependent on them for a living. So you've got to. That would be the one thing that gives you freedom, if you can be independent somewhere. But everyone's got to work for somebody. You see, this is the problem. But be as independent as you possibly can be. Don't let them threaten you, blackmail you with whatever, cancelling you, ridiculing you, losing your job. If you can stand up to that, you have courage, and
you're truly free.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all we need to be.
Thank you very much.
Love and peace, Ash.
Yes.
See you later.
A very cold hand. Sorry.
Yeah, me too.